Where did sin come from? Did God create it, and why was it allowed to endure? Those are very frequent questions, and they're the ones we're going to be looking at on today's episode of Christianity 101. So in this video, we're going to be looking at the very beginning of history. And we're going to be looking at how this all started. And I'm sorry, I'm going to be glancing down because I've got my notes, because I am terrible at doing this sort of thing, and every thought in my head goes... So, where did Christianity start? We always say in the beginning, and Christianity is generally thought to have started at 2 points. Now, first point is the birth of Christ, which Christians, Christ, Christianity, and that could be the historical founding point of Christianity. However, as Christians, we understand that our religion is just a continuation of the Jews' religion. The Jews don't believe Jesus was Christ, we do. And so our starting point can also be said to be at the beginning of the Bible, in Genesis. That's about the historical time where we started. However, neither of those 2 points is actually true. See, Christianity is almost looking at our history, and that's why we're kind of teaching this as a history class. And the starting point of the world's history goes before Genesis was written. So in the entertainment industry, you hear something called a flashback, and that's actually what we're going to look at now. You see, in Revelation, the Apostle John was writing down a vision God had given to him via an angel. And that's actually how we know a lot of what is going to happen. It's kind of a roadmap for us. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at that, and it gives us some insight to what happened before Genesis started. So a good 5,000 years before John was actually writing this out. So we're going to go ahead and look at Revelation 12, 7 and 9. And you see how bad I am at this. I promise I will get better. It's just going to take time. So, Revelation 12, 7 and 9. 7 through 9. I don't think I've had enough coffee today. And there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought, and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon that was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world, he was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So that goes ahead and lets us know that before Genesis started, there was a war in heaven. And we understand that a third of the angels sided with Lucifer. So we're going to do a little bit of world building to better understand the world we live in now. Well, no pun intended with that world building. I know, that one's bad. So, in the beginning, or in a galaxy far, far away, there were 3 beings. Now, the first was God, an all-powerful creator and king who ruled over all of his creation. And we know that God created everything, and we're not the first world that was ever created. If you look at all the galaxies, that was all him. Now, we are special, but that's getting a little bit ahead of myself. And just go ahead and keep in mind that we are not the only beings in the galaxy. That is biblically true. So, we have God, who rules over all. Then we have his son, Michael, who is referenced in Revelation 12. Remember, he did not have the name Jesus until the events of the New Testament. That is when he was named Jesus. But before that, that's why you don't see Jesus in the Old Testament. Keep that in mind. So, we have Michael, who was God's right hand, the second in command. But it wasn't as if he overreached, if he wasn't eager to take his father's place. If you go ahead and think of before the modern day era, when generally businesses were father to son, family passed down, the son, a good son, would not be eager to take his father's place. He would learn all that he could, and when the father decided, all right, now I'm going to step down, now it's your turn, that's when he would take over. Until then, it was his duty to support his father and to learn from him. And his father could rely on him and not be worried that his son was trying to dispose of him. So that is the idea we have of Jesus. And the third one is Lucifer. Remember, he did not get the name Satan until he was actually cast down to the earth. We know Lucifer was a very beautiful being. His name translates actually to the light bringer. And let's go ahead and pop over to Ezekiel, and I'm being very slow with this Bible because this is very old, my apologies. So Ezekiel 28:14. Thou art the anointed cherubim that covereth. And that is a reference to when the children of Israel, which, again, this is a bit past where we are right now. The children of Israel had the Ark of the Covenant, and it was covered in pure gold, and it had 2 cherubim. And we'll get into that description later so you get a better idea of who they are. We have those cherubim on each side, and they covered the Ark. They were protecting it. So that's referenced them, and cherubims are beings of great beauty. It is commonly understood, and even at my church, I actually had a discussion with my pastor not 30 minutes ago, trying to research this. It's commonly understood that Lucifer was an archangel. However, I did quite a bit of digging, because that's what I was always taught. And it's also another common assumption that he was the commander of heaven's armies. And that's why we suppose that he had enough sway to go ahead and convince other angels into rebellion. I could not find a reference to Lucifer actually being an archangel. And it wasn't exactly, alright, I'm going to Google this for 10 minutes, then give up. So, he's known as a being of great beauty, and certainly power. And it's a cherubim. It was clear that he was high up in heaven's hierarchy. He wasn't a nobody. But I cannot find any verse that says he was an archangel. And if I'm wrong, if someone watching this knows a verse that proves me wrong, by all means, let me know. Because I don't want to say that he was without evidence to support it. If you've got that evidence, let me know, because this is the search for what is actually biblically true. And if I'm false, please call me on it. The only fool is the person who can't admit that he's wrong. And I would very much like to know if I'm being a fool. So, we know that he was a being of great beauty, power, but he wanted more. And that's when we're going to pop over to Isaiah 14, 12 through 14. Yeah, that's correct, 12 through 14. As I said before, I am clearly not good at this. So, Isaiah 14, 12 through 14. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation, in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Again, he, as it's clearly say, he wanted more. He wanted to be like God. And he gathered a third of the angels to his cause. But what was that cause? I'm sorry for that little skip there. There was a technical difficulties. So, if Lucifer rebelled and fought a war, it doesn't say that he was cast out instantly. It said he fought, which says there was a struggle, which it wasn't just an instant, oh, you're rebelling, that's cute. In fact, against the king of Tyre, which we will get into later, It also said that an angel struggled against Lucifer, so this is not a being of no power. So God, as we understand, is all powerful, which means he could have won. But instead, Michael and his angels fought. So God allowed this war to happen, and we know that he knows all. So if he allowed the war to happen, and if indeed Lucifer rebelled and God created Lucifer, does that mean God created sin? And these are our two questions today. What was Lucifer's cause, and did God create sin? That's the two ones we're looking at. And the answer for the second is actually going to help with the answer for the first. And the answer for the first is free will. See, God never wanted to force anyone to serve him, and he doesn't. He allows everyone on earth and all of his angels free will, the ability to choose. Because loyalty through being forced, being coerced, that's not love. That is not actual wholehearted service. So God allowed the free will, and you could almost say that the ability to sin and the possibility to sin was always there. It simply didn't occur. And that was because the beings trusted in God. They obeyed through their own free will. It wasn't as if Lucifer broke some compulsion to serve. He simply chose not to. He had pride fill his heart. I lost my place. So we understand that the war happened, but Lucifer and his angels were cast to earth, which means about this time, then God created the earth. And I think, and in my opinion, this is not biblically backed up. This is my opinion. I think that the pride was already there. It was willing of Lucifer. And the creation of the earth was kind of a tipping point. And something very special happens with the creation of our earth, which leads me to believe this. Again, my opinion. This is not biblically backed up. Well, part of it. The opinion lie. You get it. You're smart. So, God created the earth, and this is when we start looking at Genesis. This is kind of the flashback point being over. So, in 5 days, voice crack, in 5 days, he created the heaven and the earth, all that is in it, and on the 6th, now on the 7th he rested, and that's how we know it's our Sabbath. He actually sanctified it and made it holy. And curiously enough, he only makes a few things holy. Continuing past that. So, what was the special thing that actually occurred when he created this world? And the answer to that is us. Now, we're going to look at Genesis 1, 26 and 27. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. So, here's a question. What do angels look like? Now, you see a lot of depictions, artist depictions, of angels looking like us only with wings. And that is not correct. There's a good reason their opening line, whenever they refer to humans, is, "Don't be afraid." You've got a ton of actual descriptions of angels in the Bible, and I've heard it summed up as everyone who actually saw an angel's true form, searched their mind and stretched their imagination to try to describe this being and fell short every time. So, if they don't look like God, that is what we can actually nail down. They do not look like God. So who was he talking to? he was talking to the only other person who looked like him, his only son. Lost my place yet again, just kind of ignore that. So, we are the only other beings besides Jesus to actually be in God's image. And you're talking about Lucifer, who's someone very prideful, who wants to be like God. And God creates essentially these nobodies, these new creations, and for the first time ever says, let's make them in our image. And I think that was the tipping point. Again, that is my opinion, but I'm fairly certain about it. It makes sense. And that's really what you have to look at it, is, does this explanation make sense? In the Bible, does this hit something? What's that word? Not counter. Conflict. I guess conflict's the best word. Does this conflict with something? Does it not make sense? Or does it? Does it actually... God gave us a mind to go ahead and figure stuff out on our own. So, anyways, that's the opinion. That's getting a little tangent. Moving on. So, God gave Adam and Eve, the first two humans, a commandment. And we find that in Genesis 2, verses 16 and 17. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree in the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. For in that day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. That is the one commandment he gave them. Do not eat of this tree. And it was a test more than anything. It was their test of, do they trust God or do they disobey and fall to temptation? And unfortunately, we know how that story went. But there's something in the telling of that story that's important. And we actually can get a glimpse of a cause. And the cause that allowed Lucifer to rally a third of the angels to him. And that's Genesis 30, 1 through 7. I almost said third, that's why I kind of drew it out. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. But of the fruit of that tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye surely die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, that your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that that tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise. Man, I'm messing up today. She took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together, and made themselves aprons. In that moment, they knew what sin was. And more than that, they knew that they had sinned. You see, the recently fallen and newly dubbed Satan was wise. He was crafty. He was clever. He may have been filled with pride and a ton of jealousy. But he was very wise. And when he accused God of not being just, he effectively put God on trial for the entire universe to see. Does God abide by his own rules? And honestly, that's what this entire thing is about. So, God now must prove that he is just and fair. Now, there is another key of why this has been allowed to go on so long, and we find that Romans 6:23 is the punishment for sin. So let's go ahead and look at that first. Romans 6:23, maybe if I actually flip to the correct page, we get somewhere. For the wages of sin is death. Period. And as of that moment, when they sinned, they were separated from God. And they did begin to die. It took a little for their bodies to actually, catch up. But as we know, our cells are constantly being regenerated. They constantly die and are being regenerated. That didn't happen before. That is, what we have now is the aging process, and it didn't happen. We were sustained by essentially the power of God, connected to Him. So, God's law is clear. And again, death is caused by the separation between us and God of sin. Sin just kind of cutting us off. Now, again, the key of why this has been allowed to continue for so long is found in 1 John 4:8. He that loveth not He that loveth not knoweth not God. We're used to double negatives. It threw me for a second. For God is love. God is love. And the reason that this has been allowed to continue is, in God's eyes, not a single one of us is expendable. Now, He was well within His rights to destroy everything, Satan, his demons, or fallen angels as we understand it, and mankind. They sinned, and the law is very clear. The punishment is death. He could have destroyed everything and started over right then. But God knows what is going to happen. And it kind of sounds like the future set in stone. Certain points are. Certain points of God is going to have this happen. But to get there, think of it as a lot of threads, or a giant winding river with just a ton of creeks breaking off it and coming back. We all have free choice. We all have free will. There are some spots that we know the future is going to happen. We know what's going to occur. But we all have free choice of what we do with our lives. It's not like fate doesn't exactly exist. There is no predestined points in our lives where we are going to do something. We can always choose not to do something or choose to do something. So God knew that there was the possibility Adam and Eve would sin. He allowed it to continue. He allowed them to choose freely. And He could see in the future, for the lack of a better term. And He could see every single one of us. We are told in the Bible that He knows us when we're in our mother's womb. That He knows the number of hairs on our head. He loves us. And so if He cut it off right there, the countless generations that would come, His beloved children would be gone forever. And of that moment, when they sinned, that was their entire destiny. Except, right after, I guess the second sin, the first would be Satan's decision to rebel. After the second sin came the first promise of redemption. And God had already determined that course of action, and we know that because it wasn't He came right after Adam and Eve had sewn aprons of fig leaves. We'll pop back over to Genesis 3, and I should have kept my place. Because now I'm not going to be able to find it again. Come on, just one page over. There we go. And so this is verse 8 of chapter 3. And they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God amongst the trees of the garden. This happens immediately after they sinned. And later, on down in, where is that verse? I wrote it down somewhere. 15. So, this is one page over. He goes ahead and addresses both Adam, Eve, and the serpent. So the serpent was still there. So this happened immediately after, which means he and his son already knew what was going to happen and planned a way for us to have redemption, redeem ourselves. Through, well, be redeemed. So he addresses the serpent after he had asked Adam what you've done. And so let's just continue through. And the Lord God called unto Adam and said unto him, Where art thou? And he said, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself. And he said, Who told thee that thou wast naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree whereof that I commanded thee that thou shouldest not eat? And right here, think of him, and we're told God's our Father. So think of him right here as the Father giving the child a chance to come clean, to confess. And the man said, The woman whom thou gavest to me, and gavest to be with me, and she gave me of the tree, and I did eat. He's passing off the blame. And he's accusing God. He's like, hey, you gave me this woman, and she gave me of the tree to eat. So it's her fault, and it's your fault. And the Lord God said unto the woman, What is this that thou hast done? And the woman said, The serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. Again, passing off the blame. And the Lord God said unto the serpent, Because thou hast done this, and I heard it addressed in a sermon this way once, that God didn't ask the serpent, he didn't ask Satan, hey, did you do this? Satan going, yeah, I did. What are you going to do about it? And we understand that Satan is a serpent due to other correlations in the Bible where he is actually named as a serpent. A lot of those are in Revelation. Again, we'll get to that later. But we're kind of stretching on time. And probably your attention span's going in. So, we'll finish this. And the Lord God said unto the serpent, Because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all the cattle, and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed, and it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. So this is the first reference to Jesus and redemption in the Bible. And he promises, and the woman in the Bible is referred to as God's church. Now there's two women, and we see them referenced heavily in Revelation. One of them is Babylon, which we'll get into later, and the other is, the righteous woman, is God's church, God's children. So he promises two things at this point. So one, that man would struggle against their sinful nature, and it wouldn't consume them if they didn't want it to. We'll actually be able to back that up real fast in Matthew. Matthew 5 is the blesseds, essentially. That's kind of what I've heard it referred to as, and the reason for that is Jesus opens up with a sermon saying, Blessed are those, and where is... I was not prepared for that. Taught them sing. Matthew 5:6 is when he says, Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. God intended that man would be able to struggle against this. They were not cursed and doomed for eternity. And the connection of, because I am terrible at explaining things, as you have no doubt realized by this point. So let's go ahead and turn this over to our pastor, and he shall further explain how this is referencing Jesus. Alright, so this is Pastor Jerry Bandy of the Lakeview SDA Church, and Pastor, can you go ahead and explain when God is talking to the serpent and what exactly he means in that passage?
Certainly. In verse 14 of chapter 3, it says this to the serpent. And the Lord God said to the serpent, Because you have done this thing, cursed are you above all cattle, and above all beasts of the field. On your belly shall you go, and dust shall you eat all the days of your life. We know that in the old days that the serpents, they all flew. But because of this terrible thing that he had done to Adam and Eve in the garden, he would from now on crawl on his belly.
And on the next verse, when he speaks of between the woman and the serpent.
And in verse 15 it says, "And I will put enmity," which is division, "between you and the woman, and between your posterity and her posterity. Her posterity shall tread on your head underfoot, and you shall strike him in his heel." So this is a prophecy letting us know that division will be put between God's people and the devil and his people. And God's people will tread on her head, the head of the serpent, and you shall strike him in his heel, meaning that Jesus will be wounded, and he was wounded, and he gave his life for mankind.
Thank you, Pastor. So in the same hour that we had sinned, God decided that his precious children would not be abandoned, and that he would go ahead and provide them a way out, to be able to be redeemed. He didn't just cast us off then, because every single person who would come later would then be destroyed. Like, they would never exist. And more than anything, he desires us to be saved. So one day, sin will be destroyed forever. And one day, the earth will be returned to what it was supposed to be. And that day will come after everyone on earth either chooses in their hearts evil or righteousness. But that is a lesson for another day. Thank you for watching. And as always, if you have questions, go ahead and either post them in the comments, send me an email. I'll go ahead and include the email link at the end of this. We are still in the process of setting up a phone line, but as soon as that's done, I will go ahead and post it on our page and on the end of videos as well. And if you see somewhere where I am biblically wrong, please let me know. Go ahead and let me know where I'm wrong, the verse that gives evidence that I'm wrong, and if I am corrected, I will, next video come around, I will come around and say, hey, I've been wrong here, this is why, here's the verse, here's the evidence. If I am trying to go ahead and give you the truth of Christianity's history, then if I'm wrong, I would really appreciate knowing. Well, we'll see you next week. And next week we'll be addressing Cain and Abel and the flood. So look for that.